At noon on Christmas Day, Dad called and said, "Everyone's staying home? The weather's too dangerous." 4 hours later, I walked past my sister's house and saw my parents' cars parked outside. Then Mom posted a photo captioned, "Celebrating with family." Lindsay stood beside my ex-husband beneath a sign that read, "She said yes." On her hand was Grandma Evelyn's sapphire ring, the one she left to me. I took a screenshot, pressed like, and wrote, "Looks wonderful." The post disappeared instantly. Then Dad called, Mom called, Lindsay called. I ignored them because the ring was stolen, but the money behind their engagement was worse. My name is Catherine Rowland, though everyone called me Kate. I was 41, lived in Wheaton, Illinois, and worked as a regional operations director for a network of medical laboratories. My job was built around problems: weather delays, staffing shortages, compliance failures, couriers missing critical pickups. If something went wrong, I was expected to stay calm, find the gap, and keep everything moving. My family loved calling me the strong one. For years, I accepted it as a compliment. Then I realized strong was the word they used when they wanted me to absorb something Lindsay could not. Lindsay was 6 years younger and owned a small interior design studio called Larkin Pine. She was talented, charming, and always one difficult month away from a crisis. When she left college for a semester, Mom said she was overwhelmed. When her business lost 2 major clients, Dad said creative companies needed time. When she failed to repay the $12,000 I had loaned her, both of them asked me not to add pressure. But when my 14-year marriage ended, they watched me return to work and said, "See, you're handling it." That was the pattern. Lindsay's pain required protection. Mine proved I was capable. Dad, Gerald, liked to think of himself as the family peacemaker. He avoided loud arguments, gave practical advice, and always found a reason why I should be the one to compromise. "You'll be all right," he often said. "Lindsay doesn't recover the way you do." Mom, Patricia, cared deeply about traditions, holiday photographs, and everyone appearing close. She could forgive almost anything if confronting it threatened the picture of a happy family. I organized dinners, handled insurance questions, reviewed paperwork, and solved emergencies no one else wanted. I had introduced clients to Lindsay, helped my parents with bills, and spent years believing reliability would earn trust. Instead, it convinced them I could survive being betrayed. They never said Lindsay deserved more than I did. They simply acted as though hurting me cost less. I thought that favoritism was limited to money, attention, and who received another chance. I had no idea my parents had used that same logic to protect Lindsay while she built a relationship with my husband, while I still fought to save ours. Nolan Price and I had been married for 14 years. We met in our 20s, built a life slowly, and settled into the kind of marriage that looked stable from the outside because neither of us shouted. Nolan worked in regional sales for a commercial lighting company. He was polished, persuasive, and good at making difficult choices sound inevitable. For years, I believed that skill helped him at work. I did not realize he was using it on me. 2 years before Christmas, I introduced Lindsay to Nolan as a client. She needed portfolio work, and he wanted his home office redesigned. At first, everything looked normal. She brought samples to the house, measured walls, and sent mood boards. Then Nolan began staying late at client dinners. Lindsay started taking weekend site visits. Their schedules overlapped often enough to seem strange, but never enough to prove anything. When I asked Nolan whether there was someone else, he looked almost offended. "There isn't anyone else," he said. "We've just become different people." He told me our marriage had ended quietly. No betrayal, no secret life, just distance. I wanted to believe him because the alternative meant questioning my husband, my sister, and every family gathering where they had stood in the same room, pretending nothing had changed. Nolan asked for separation 19 months before Christmas. I filed for divorce a month later. We had no children, so the case focused on the house, retirement accounts, compensation, and financial disclosures. Nolan signed a sworn affidavit stating that he had listed every account: bonus, stock payment, and significant transfer. I read it carefully. My attorney reviewed it. Nothing looked large enough to justify a fight. Our divorce was finalized 14 months before that Christmas. I walked away with a fair-looking settlement and the nagging sense that fairness depended on facts I had no way to verify. What I did not know was that Dad had already seen Nolan's car parked overnight outside Lindsay's townhouse before I filed. He confronted them privately. They admitted they were together. Dad never told me. Instead, he told Nolan, "End the marriage cleanly before this destroys everyone, by everyone." He meant Lindsay, Nolan, Mom, and himself. I was the one person he expected to survive the truth later. And while I signed divorce papers believing there had been no affair, Nolan was moving money through Lindsay's company to build the life they planned to reveal after I could no longer question the settlement or stop what they had started. Christmas morning began with freezing rain tapping against my townhouse windows. By noon, the sidewalks were glazed, and the news warned drivers about black ice on untreated roads. At 12:15, Dad called. "Everyone's staying home," he said. "The weather's too bad. He told me Mom did not want anyone driving. Christmas dinner would be moved to the weekend, and Lindsay was spending the day alone." The excuse made sense. I put the casserole I had prepared into the refrigerator, changed into sweatpants, and told myself one quiet holiday was not a tragedy. By late afternoon, the freezing rain had stopped, the main streets had been salted, and people in my neighborhood were walking dogs again. Lindsay lived 4 blocks away, around 5. I took mine out and turned down the road near her townhouse. That was when I saw Dad's sedan parked along the curb. Mom's car sat behind it. Nolan's SUV was in the driveway. I stopped walking. For several seconds, I stared at the 3 vehicles, trying to create an innocent explanation. Maybe someone needed help. Maybe they had gathered after the roads improved. Maybe Dad had called everyone except me because he thought I lived farther away. Then my phone buzzed. Mom had posted a photo on Facebook. The caption read, "Celebrating with family." Dad was raising a champagne glass. Mom stood beside a table covered with wrapped gifts. Lindsay wore a dark green dress, and Nolan had one arm around her waist. Behind them was a sign that said, "She said yes." On Lindsay's left hand was an oval sapphire surrounded by diamonds. I knew that ring before I enlarged the image. Grandma Evelyn had worn it for 46 years. Her will had left it to me. Mom was only storing it in her safe while I settled into my new home after the divorce. I took screenshots of the photograph, caption, and timestamp. Then I pressed like and wrote 2 words, "Looks wonderful." The post disappeared immediately. My phone rang before the page finished refreshing. Dad, then Mom, then Lindsay. I let every call go unanswered. Dad left a voicemail saying, "This isn't what it looks like. Call me before you overreact." Mom texted. I posted that by mistake. Lindsay's message came last. "Please don't ruin tonight." That sentence removed the last possibility of an innocent misunderstanding. They had not canceled Christmas. They had canceled me. And while my sister was wearing my inheritance beside my former husband, I realized the money financing their celebration might have been taken from me long before that night. The ring mattered for reasons Lindsay could not pretend she misunderstood. Grandma Evelyn had left it to me by name. Her probate inventory described it as an oval sapphire surrounded by diamonds, and the distribution receipt showed that I had accepted it 3 years earlier. When I moved out of the house Nolan and I had shared, I asked Mom to keep it in her safe until I settled into my townhouse. She texted back, "Of course, it will be safe here." Lindsay had been present when Grandma's jewelry was divided. She knew exactly who owned it legally. On the first business day after Christmas, I called the attorney who had handled Grandma's estate. He reviewed the file and confirmed that Mom had possession, not ownership, that afternoon. He sent a formal demand requiring the ring's return. I did not call Lindsay. I did not ask Nolan how he had proposed with property that belonged to me. The documents were clearer than any argument. Then I called Monica Feld, the attorney who had represented me during the divorce. I sent her the Christmas screenshot, Dad's voicemail, Lindsay's message, Nolan's financial affidavit, and our settlement agreement. Monica listened without interrupting. "The affair may explain the deception," she said, "but it does not automatically change the property settlement. We need to know whether the deception entered the financial disclosures." That question forced me to look at records I had tried to forget. During the divorce, Nolan had listed several payments to Larkin Pine Interiors. He described them as design fees for his office and the townhouse he planned to rent after our separation. At the time, the amounts seemed high, but Lindsay's invoices made them look legitimate. Now I added them together. $92,000. No home office required that much work. I began reviewing old calendars, credit card statements, and photographs. A weekend, Nolan called a sales conference matched a trip Lindsay had described as a client retreat. A hotel charge appeared in the same town. An old family photograph showed Nolan's hand resting on Lindsay's lower back 4 months before he asked me to separate. Then Monica found something more important in an email from Nolan's employer, attached to a document produced during the divorce. There was a reference to an upcoming equity buyout. Nolan had told me the payment was delayed. It never appeared in his sworn disclosure. Monica asked, "Did he ever report receiving $108,000? No." She looked again at the 4 payments to Lindsay's company. "Then we preserve everything before anyone learns what we are checking." By Friday, Lindsay returned the ring through her lawyer. She included no apology. Monica sent Nolan a formal preservation notice and began preparing a request for limited financial discovery. The sapphire was back in my possession, but Monica warned me not to mistake the easiest recovery for the largest betrayal. "The ring is yours," she said. "Now we find out whether the townhouse was partly yours too." Monica's preservation notice reached Nolan before New Year's. 2 weeks later, she filed for limited financial discovery based on the missing equity payment, the unusually large transfers to Larkin Pine, and Nolan's sworn statement that every significant asset had been disclosed. The court did not reopen everything immediately. It allowed us to examine a narrow question whether Nolan had concealed marital property before the settlement. The records answered that question clearly. They showed not one impulsive payment, but a deliberate sequence designed to make marital money look like ordinary business revenue before our settlement became legally final. His employer confirmed that Nolan received a $108,000 equity buyout 2 months before asking me to separate. The payment went into an account he had never listed. From there, $92,000 moved to Lindsay's company through 4 invoices labeled Design Retainer, Project Management, Furniture Deposit, and Material Procurement. A forensic accountant followed the money. $64,000 became the down payment on Lindsay's townhouse. $18,000 paid for renovations and furniture. $10,000 funded their engagement celebration and a wedding deposit. Nolan kept the remaining $16,000 in the undisclosed account. The affair explained why they had hidden the transfers. The signed financial affidavit made the concealment legally important. After Nolan received notice of the discovery, Dad demanded a family meeting. I agreed only after the bank records had been preserved. The ring had been returned, and Monica told me there was nothing they could erase by talking first. We met at my parents' house. Dad began with, "We were trying to protect everyone. Everyone except me." Mom folded her hands. "We didn't want to ruin Christmas. You didn't save Christmas. You celebrated by removing me from the definition of family." Lindsay's eyes filled with tears. "Nolan and I didn't plan to fall in love. You planned the dinner, the weather lie, the ring, and the announcement. What you didn't plan was me seeing it." Nolan leaned forward. "We were going to tell you after the holidays." I placed his sworn financial affidavit on the table. "You already told me under oath. You just used false numbers." Then I laid out the employer record, the 4 transfers to Larkin Pine, and the townhouse closing statement. Mom stared at the figures. "You used that money for the house." Lindsay said the payments were legitimate design income. I slid over the invoices, then explain why your company received $92,000 and paid $64,000 directly into your own closing. Dad tried to redirect the conversation. "This has become vindictive." I placed one final printout beside his hand. It was a message he had sent Nolan before I filed for divorce. "Finish this cleanly before Kate finds out." His face changed. "You knew," I said. He looked down. "I knew before you filed. I thought you would survive it better than Lindsay would survive losing him. You treated my ability to survive as permission to betray me." No one answered. Nolan said the money would have been spent during the marriage anyway. That was not your decision to make alone. He accused me of trying to destroy their future. The affair ended our marriage. The false disclosure brought me back into your life with a lawyer. I gathered the documents. I am not asking either of you to end your relationship. You can keep it. Lindsay looked relieved for half a second. Then I continued, but you cannot keep my inheritance, my share of the money, or the version of events you needed me to protect. For the first time, their engagement was no longer the center of the room. The numbers were. The amended settlement took 7 months. By then, Nolan's attorney had seen the employer records, the undisclosed account, the transfers through Larkin Pine, and the affidavit he had signed under oath. He agreed to settle before a full evidentiary hearing. I received $67,000, which included my share of the concealed marital property, interest, and part of the forensic accounting costs. Nolan paid another $18,000 toward legal and accounting fees. I did not receive the entire $108,000. That money had been marital property, not automatically mine alone. I recovered the portion that should have been considered before I signed the original agreement. Lindsay had to refinance the townhouse and repay money that had passed through her company. She reduced her staff, delayed the wedding, and stopped telling people the studio had financed the house through growth. I never contacted her clients. I did not post the bank records. Her consequences came from the financial decisions she had made, not from anything I said publicly. The sapphire ring went into a safe deposit box in my name. I did not sell it. I did not wear it to prove a point. I simply made sure no one in my family could borrow it, gift it, or reinterpret ownership again. My boundaries with Mom and Dad changed too. I stopped organizing holidays. I removed them as emergency contacts. I updated my estate documents and told them that important communication had to be in writing. Dad sent me a letter months later. I knew before you filed. He wrote, I believed you would survive it better than Lindsay would survive losing him. I answered once. Surviving it did not make it acceptable. Mom kept insisting they had only wanted one peaceful Christmas. Peace that requires one person to be lied to and excluded is not peace. I told her, it is staging. Nolan and Lindsay remained engaged. I did not try to stop them. Their relationship was no longer my responsibility. What mattered was that they could no longer build their future using my inheritance, my share of marital money, or my silence. For years, my family had treated my strength as a resource they could spend. The amended settlement did more than return money. It ended that arrangement. They chose each other, but they could no longer choose for me. By the following Christmas, the weather turned cold again, but this time, I was not waiting for a call from people who only remembered I was family when they needed me to protect their version of the truth. 1 year later, Christmas came with snow and no phone call from my father. I was no longer waiting for one. The amended settlement was complete. Grandma Evelyn's ring was secure. Nolan and Lindsay were still engaged, though their wedding had been postponed. Mom and Dad remained in my life at a distance. Gerald had admitted what he knew. Patricia still cared more about how the family looked than what it had done. I stopped arguing. That Christmas, I invited 2 friends, a divorced coworker, and a neighbor who would otherwise have eaten alone. No one lied about the weather. No one deleted photographs. No one needed me to disappear so the evening could feel peaceful. We ate, exchanged gifts, and laughed without anyone measuring who belonged at the table. My father had canceled Christmas because he believed one lie could keep me outside the celebration. What he never expected was that I would stop asking to be invited back. My family thought surviving their betrayal meant I would eventually excuse it. They learned survival was simply the moment I stopped needing their version of love. Would you have confronted them that night or saved the evidence first? Comment below and subscribe for more family betrayal and clean revenge stories.